Check 1, 2. You hear me?
There you go. Perfect. Thank you
Check,
very
check.
much. And
Okay.
it looks like you have all sorts of amazing photos behind you. What are those of?
Oh, just I guess you've been on the air for 56 years, so I'm actually in my father's office. So many of these photographs are part of his collection that he collected over the years. So yeah,
Amazing.
there's lots and lots of stuff around.
So first, Lenny, I would like to ask you about Chin Radio today, about what sort of programming you do and what's your mission.
So Chin Radio is as you know, is a multicultural broadcaster. So we broadcast in over 50 languages on 4 of our radio stations. We have 3 here in Toronto and 1 in Ottawa. And we also produce a lot of ethnic television programming for Rogers, Omni, and City TV. So we've pretty much been in the multicultural media business for going on over a half a century now. And our job really is to inform, entertain our listeners in 50 languages. And we're a for-profit organization. We're not subsidized by the government. And our mandate is third language programming. So regardless of the demographics, and we don't really operate much like other radio stations do. We target third language communities such as, let's say, Cantonese, for example. Within that community, we are pledged to entertain everybody within that community, from teenage to seniors, right?
Sure.
So we're constantly modifying our programming to meet the needs of our listeners.
Speaking of Cantonese, I believe that's 1540 AM. What are some of the other languages that you might hear on Chin Radio?
Gosh, take a pick. So I'll let you know what our biggest markets are. Sort of Cantonese, Mandarin, Punjabi, Hindi, many of the communities from South Asia, Latin, Spanish, but from South America primarily. Italian, of course,
Sure.
which is our oldest group. Portuguese is also large with us. In Ottawa, Arabic is our #1 language group, followed by South Asian and Chinese.
Yeah.
In Toronto, it's much more diverse because it's a much larger city. But we speak 50 languages, Polish to Bengali. So we're quite diverse in that respect.
Really impressive. I would love to talk about the founding of Chin Radio in 1966. What did Toronto look like in that era, and what did Chin Radio provide to their listeners back then?
Well, Toronto was a very different city in '66, as you can imagine. It was sort of, we had been experiencing mass immigration primarily from Italy and Europe post-war. So Toronto was rapidly changing. There was this enormous ethnic workforce coming into the city in the late 50s and early 60s. And there was a real need for information in a third language, in a language that these newly arrived immigrants could understand. And in '66, or back in the early '60s, there were none of these services available, right? That are here today. I mean, City of Toronto boasts diversity, and it speaks over 150 languages, and you can pretty much navigate City Hall in a third language now because those services are readily available and interpreters are readily available. Back in the early '60s, not so. And there was and of course, with massive immigration comes, the stain of prejudice, of suspicion and concern. So it was a rough go for immigrants in those early days. So my dad had a vision that his market, his community, it being of Italian extraction. I should say my father was born Canadian. He was born in Canada in 1915 and actually served in the Canadian Army during the Second World War. And so, he was very much sort of an interesting fellow because he had the benefit of both worlds. He was Canadian by birth, but also could understand the immigrant experience because his parents were immigrants who arrived at the turn of the century. After the war, he started a supermarket or a grocery store, and catered largely to the Italian community because of the neighborhood that he established his business in, and recognized that radio was a wonderful vehicle to reach his customers, his community around him. And that's kind of how we started in radio. He sort of bought a half hour from Alan Waters on 1050 Chum,
Yeah.
and at 7 o'clock at night, and that launched his interest in radio. And soon after, in 1966, I should say, in 1965, he teamed up with none other than Ted Rogers on a joint application for Radio 1540, and they together they won that license. And Ted Rogers did English language programming during the day, and my father did multicultural programming at night, much as he was doing as a broker with other radio stations. And he and Ted were great friends. And when Ted found 680, he sold his shares to my dad for 1540, and my father then turned it into a 100% multilingual. So he got to do what he really wanted to do, was multilingual broadcasting. So he was a very interesting guy because he was a musician, and so he was also like a jazz trumpet player, and he was the first trumpet in a big band. He had his own orchestra at the age of 15. Then he went to work for the Benny Palmer Orchestra, which was the Guy Lombardo of Ontario. If you know, Guy Lombardo was a big band leader back in his day. And so my dad was a very successful musician up until he enlisted in the Army. And so he had a real flair for show business. It just sort of came out, in his career as a musician. And then when he went to war, and the Army, that taught him discipline. So he was this interesting combination of a creative entertainer that was very disciplined in his craft. When he came back to Toronto after the war, he got in the food business. For what reason, I don't know. I don't know what the inspiration was there. Maybe because I think he had some cousins that had a little grocery store, and he jumped in as a partner and realized he could probably do a better job on his own, which he did shortly after that. And as the Italian immigration in Toronto and in this particular neighborhood, Little Italy, started to grow, he started to recognize that this community needed more than just sustenance of food. They needed access to culture, and music was in his blood. And in his travels to Italy, buying products to import for his grocery store, supermarket, he met other impresarios and musicians there, and decided that, hey, why doesn't he try bringing an Italian artist of great reputation that everybody in Toronto would know, all the Italians would know, and try a concert. And he did it with an artist, and it was a huge success. And so that was another ingredient to his marketing skills. So you go into my dad's supermarket, he would cut you like a pound of cheese and some salami and sell you a couple of tickets to a concert, right? So the supermarket became very central to the Italian community because there was so much activity going on. And he eventually expanded into records as well. He had his own record label and he sold records. Right. So Italians back then could get all of these cultural things from my father. And so he was really in touch with the needs of the community and what kind of really fed not only their stomachs, but their soul.
Can you tell me about what is special about Little Italy, given that you grew up there? Are there any barbershops or fruit markets that you remember from your childhood?
The neighborhood has changed immensely, of course, over the years, but it's still, it's got. I say it's a village within a cosmopolitan city, but it's got the heart of European. It's got the soul of a European city. And there's something about this neighborhood that is, you know, perpetual. You know, there's St. Francis Church that for many of the Italian families that grew up in this neighborhood, that became their first church. And to this day, during the Good Friday procession, you know, hundreds of thousands of Italians from all over the GTA come back to this neighborhood for that religious procession. It's, you know, it's very, very popular. Very, and you know, there's that generation that comes back to the neighborhood and goes back to their childhood streets and recognizes the home that they were raised in, and it's very nostalgic. So there's that kind of a spirit that still lives in this neighborhood, even though it's very diverse culturally as well. And you know, we as a community continue to celebrate the history of our Italian roots. We named our neighborhood Little Italy in tribute to that history, and we started this board back in '85, and we continue to find ways in which we can celebrate the Italian culture here in our festivals on the street. So we have the Taste of Little Italy, we have Festa del Strada in Piazza Lombardi, which we just launched this year. We have the Cavalcade of Lights that we celebrate the Christmas with Christmas carols in Italian and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we try to do that as tribute to the roots of the city and our history. We consider this neighborhood, you know, soccer central. You know, the fans of the sport love to enjoy it in the neighborhood that loves it and respects it, and the connection to Italy is very strong, especially when Italy is a contender, you know, in any of the matches. That's when things really come to light in this neighborhood. And you know, I think it's a way of multiple generations reconnecting with their cultural roots. You know, like I'm second generation, my daughter's third, and you know, that generation continually longs for, you know, things that bring them back to a time when the culture was alive, more alive and expressed than it might be today, either through language or food at the home and so on and so forth. So when events like the Taste of Little Italy or World Cup or European Cup, you know, comes to town, or, you know, an Italian film festival or an Italian, you know, musical concert that is hosted in this neighborhood, people really want to like connect with it culturally, but they love it even more because they get to come back to the streets where all of this kind of gave birth to it. You know, because college is very special in that way, because, you know, I guess 14, if you look at 14 division, you know, if you look at Spadina, Dufferin, the Lake to DuPont or St. Clair, if you look at those boundaries, 90%, I'd say 99% of the Italians that immigrated to Toronto in the late 50s and 60s settled in this area, right? So this, and College Street was the main artery, the nerve central of this entire neighborhood. Everything happened on College Street, and so people really kind of feel that energy, you know, and love it when they come back to this neighborhood to reminisce on it, because, you know, streetscapes, it hasn't changed all that much, right? You know, the storefronts are still there. If you look at old photographs, you can actually recognize, you know, where they were taken. So there's that kind of familiarity as well.
Sure. Today, Lenny, where is your favorite place to get Italian gelato or a coffee in Little Italy? For folks who might want to visit.
Well, I guess the most famous outlets, of course, for gelato is Sicilian ice cream, one of the longest standing ice cream shops, original ice cream shops, that was founded by the Gallipoli family back in the early 60s. So that's right over here on Crawford, Montrose. And, you know, I got to hand it to the Mastrangelo family. The Dip is one of the most famous cafes in the city of Toronto. Because of their history, they've been part of this landscape for, gosh, over close to 60 years, maybe more now, I guess. And and they still put out a really good espresso. So you're going to get authentic. You're going to get authentic espresso there, as well as perhaps the best place to watch a soccer match too. It's a like a village within a great city, and if you spend any time here, you immediately get comfortable. It's the kind of strip on College Street from Bathurst all the way to certainly to Ossington, that you can stroll on the north and south side and feel comfortable as a pedestrian. There's lots to see and do, lots of window shopping, and there's a really cool vibe in this neighborhood that you'll enjoy, and that people that do come here tend to stay longer. And I've met so many people who have come, like yourself, and enjoyed their stay and want to return, and lots of people that once upon a time lived in this neighborhood not too long ago, who are not of Italian extraction but love the neighborhood and missed it. And still want to come back. So it's a special place, and it's well worth the visit.
Well, Lenny Lombardi of Chin Radio, thank you very much for coming on to Tracks from Abroad and telling us about Little Italy.
My pleasure, Jesse. Thanks for including me.